Hello and welcome to this third episode on what to watch today at reinvent, or let's call it Let's Chat with People, because we are at home and bored. This is my way to connect with you watching and also these amazing guests that I bring in every day to the show. Today we have two very serverless persons, so imagine what we are going to talk about. We have Anton Babenko and Julian Good. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. If you don't know Anton, he's an AWS community hero based in Norway. And we have Julian, that is a serverless developer advocate. So we are going into the details of all the launches today. How are you?
Excellent. Marsha, thanks so much for inviting us. I'm very jealous of Anton's piano and his lovely background. So,
yeah,
Wow.
My brick wall is I need to up my game.
Heroes.
Well, that's how we live, you know.
The Nordic lifestyle.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for inviting us. Yeah, super happy to be here. Your FooBar channel has been doing so much good stuff talking about serverless, and so I'm more than happy to learn from the experts too.
Well, I think I've learned a lot from you guys, doing a lot in the serverless land. But yeah, today we are connecting the two YouTube channels. If you don't know, there is the serverless land, that is the YouTube channel from the serverless developer advocates, and you do quite a lot of live streaming and shows there. So
yeah, that's been certainly useful over the past year with 2020. So we've got a website as well, serverlessland.com, and that's a super good aggregation site. So we've got a whole team. Chris Munns is our boss. So if you've ever heard him speaking about serverless, he's the absolute guru. And we've got a team of 5 or 6 of us: James, Eric, Rob, Ben, myself. And we do a lot of blog writing all about serverless, and it normally goes on the AWS Compute blog. But yeah, as Marsha says, we've got some videos, some of it's live streaming, some of it's pre-recorded, but Serverless Land is an excellent aggregation site where you can find out about all things in serverless. And there's a dedicated serverless page there for reinvent, which is easy enough to find, and that links to a whole bunch of talks and other kind of things. So yeah, come and join us in Serverless Land and we can chat AWS serverless.
Exactly, and I think it's always nice to hear you. At least I really like the sessions with Sam. That's one of my favorite shows.
And that's just for Eric. Eric's awesome. Never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind the Sam stuff.
Yeah. Well, but he always have nice guests and goes into the details of Sam. So I always watch the episodes. Yeah, and we also have Anton today. And Anton, I think it's the third time you're in my channel. You're one of the recurrent guests.
yeah, but well, you are inviting.
Yeah, I know, but I like to have you in my channel. You're interesting.
Thanks for having me.
Today we are not talking about Terraform, so if you are interested in serverless with Terraform, Anton is your man.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been doing for quite a long time. So previously it was just Terraform, and then some people wanted me to do crazy things with Kubernetes, and I said, it's a little bit too complicated. Let's move to serverless. And well, serverless is also pretty complicated, as we probably will discuss today. But with Terraform, it's more fun.
Yeah.
And I see you guys doing a lot of work with serverless application model and SAM CLI, and yeah, I think it's very good time.
Yeah, and so today we will focus a lot on the serverless announcements and other developer-focused announcements. But if you have any questions, we have Ant saying hello. Hello, Ant. He was our guest yesterday. If you have any questions or you want to share any of your favorite launches or whatever, just do it in the chat. This is an interactive session, so don't feel afraid of asking questions. The first question for everybody is what you miss from reinvent. I've been asking this to everybody.
Well, I think it's quite easy. First of all, I'm missing walking in comfortable shoes for like 2-3 hours a day.
Oh, you love to walk 30,000 steps.
Yeah, I think that's one thing which associated in my brain with Las Vegas, reinvent. And yeah, and a lot of people where you literally bump into everyone and you can talk about, hey, what do you think about this service? And most likely, this guy already knows what you are talking about, or he has project using this, or he knows someone who knows something, and it's really an interesting place to be.
Because at home, when we go to the kitchen and we bounce on our spouse and we say, hey, have you seen this lunch? Their spouse is like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So that's why during reinvent, I usually go to kitchen just to get coffee. And my family already know that, it's reinvent, so see you later.
Just saying random stuff. And what about you, Julian? What you miss?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely missing the whole sort of compressed experience, I suppose, to say, of reinvent all in one place, where in fact you could just pause for the rest of life and just, we're super privileged to be able to fly to Vegas and do all of that. But yeah, just to literally have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world in this little bubble of microcosm of AWS madness for a week. So yeah, that's awesome to do, but I'm certainly obviously missing the people.
I miss people,
I love being at reinvent. Because I started with AWS last year. So last year, reinvent was my first one as an employee within the big machine, but I'd been to reinvent on my own back twice before then as a customer. And so I was madly running around sessions and meeting people and trying to do things. So yeah, I missed that this year. I miss even being on the booth and answering questions. That is such a great highlight of being able to interact with people, and then introducing yourself to some of these amazing serverless heroes and other heroes we have to pick their brains, because we've got our opinions on how things work and things we know, but we're also continually learning. And it's a weird time, and to have this elongated reinvent is amazing in some ways, that it gives people a bit more time. And I love the idea that it's obviously global now. And
is it kind of weird now that Andy did the announcements on Tuesdays, and by Tuesday nights there were already people trying the things out? That doesn't happen in general. It just is so crazy. There were so many blog posts and people like really getting hands-on. So
that's exciting, because normally the keynote things happen and people sort of wait, but because people are at home, they're going mad on the keyboard. And I know for some of the serverless things that are literally being rolled out at the time, some people are saying like, oh, this has been announced and the documentation isn't fully rolled out. You're like, hang on, give it another 10 minutes.
Exactly.
We're getting there.
It's not magic.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think Anton is having quite an experience, because you have a VR set, so you can basically get in the Vegas mood.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, talking about things which I'm missing from reinvent, I just want to add. So usually when I'm in, let's say, sitting and listening for a keynote, I am already thinking about how this can be applied to something what I work or what I can do with these technologies. And this time, when I have been listening for announcements, and they were like, "Hey, we are announcing AWS wavelength in Las Vegas," and then I thought like, "Hey, but I'm not in Las Vegas. How can I test it?" Well,
next year
it should be in Oslo. Come on.
In Oslo, yes.
Yes. Where we have, like in my village where I live, there are, I think, 40,000 people. And, it's extremely quiet. So,
I'm sure they're all hooked into AWS.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's chat a little bit about our favorite announcements, and I think they are very biased this time. What is your favorite announcement or the most interesting, Anton, for you?
Well, I think in general, all of these announcements are divided into something what I have a clue and something what I have no clue. And this time there were a lot of announcements which I have no clue.
That happens always.
yeah, exactly. But this time IoT and contact lens, which were cool, but well, I don't actually know. So for me, a really interesting one was related to serverless 10 gigabyte container images.
Fat lambdas. I baptized them.
Yeah. So 10 gigabyte images, which we can use to spin up Lambda function, is again something what I was dreaming for quite a long time. And well, it's actually doable.
what
Cool.
you're going to do with them now.
Well, I have use case where I currently use EFS to host different binaries of different, let's say, about 5, maybe 10 different gigabytes of files. And I need to access to these files from Lambda functions. But I want to package a lot of smaller Lambda functions, which will be, let's say, maybe 1 gigabyte to 2 gigabytes. But I want to package them and have them like complete altogether. This way, I can drop VPC completely from this project.
Nice.
So this is the only thing where I use VPC, just to access my Elastic file system. And well, it costs money, but that's not the biggest concern in this case. But that I have to think about this and manage it somehow and update it somehow, it's just making me a little bit upset. I really like that all of my stuff is self-contained, approximately 2 gigabytes in size. And that's what I really like. So, yeah.
Somebody's asking me about big data on AWS. I don't think we are going to talk much about big data in this show or in any other show that I'm hosting in my YouTube channel. I'm so sorry. Most of my guests are very serverless or developer focused more than data scientists, but check the reinvent sessions. There's so many things going on big data because that's quite a big part of all the announcements. So definitely go on and check that out. If you were a Spanish speaker, I could recommend you exactly who to follow, but do you have some recommendations on big data for Ryan?
Well, I think he asked before that he needs serverless Hadoop ecosystem.
Hadoop. Yeah. I don't know if there is. I think there is AMR, but I know very little on all that thing, so I don't want to start stepping on my toes. I'm falling. So sorry, Ryan. Yeah, so let's continue talking about the serverless announcement. So we had the fat lambdas, and Anton has a use case, so that's great.
Yeah, I think another use case, very practical use case for many people who even are not gonna to run gigabytes of data, but overall that you can package your dependencies, and you already use Docker on your development machine, where you have all of your tooling. Maybe you have lightweight CI/CD system somewhere next to you, and now you can just build this Docker image, somehow sign it. I have to investigate how AWS Signer works in details, but then you can actually put this machine, which you have on your local machine, into certain environments quite easily without thinking about that in development you use Docker, but then you need to zip it somehow. And well, it's much easier to use one format.
Yeah, but now we can move into the other announcement. Now you were mentioned Docker and containers. I think Julian can tell us a lot. And if you have questions, I think this is the right moment to ask the questions, because this guy knows a lot about the inner working of this. I'm putting you there on the fence.
No pressure.
That is the container image support. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, certainly the headline is basically you can now build Lambda functions from container images. Now, I'm specifically saying container images rather than just general containers, but I'll get into that, the distinction between that shortly. But I just want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture over, serverless is continually getting bigger, better, faster, more that whole time. We've got 1 millisecond billing. It's getting cheaper. We've got 10 gig functions. We've got, more CPUs throwing at it when you dial up the memory. So literally under the hood, Lambda just gets better and faster the whole time.
And I really like that pre-announcements of using these more specialized hardware now that you can do more interesting things. It's not just limited to general things. So
yeah, exactly. And so this is one of the cool things about using serverless, and I'm talking more specifically about Lambda, is under the hood, because we look after a whole bunch of stuff, it just gets better, it just gets faster, it gets more secure, it gets cheaper without you having to do anything. And that's awesome. But part of the other story that we're developing over this year and in the future and all time is also trying to meet you where you are and making serverless easy to adopt. Because Lambda's awesome. Seriously, the statistic came out this week that half of all AWS services are using Lambda. So
that was impressive.
I mean, we say, I'm not going to say eating our own dog food. It's certainly drinking our own champagne, which sounds much better.
Yes.
But, the thing is, AWS is not opinionated. It's not as though we're running around bashing other AWS's teams saying you must use Lambda. They're going to use the best tool for the job. And it's a great endorsement from AWS, Amazon, and many of our customers about how helpful and useful Lambda is. But that can always get better. And so the story is, well, we don't want Lambda to be the snowflake thing that has to be different. Oh, I've got to deploy it slightly differently, or it's harder to understand, or harder to reason with, or to monitor it is different, or to do all these kind of things. So a few announcements have come out. One of them is Lambda Extensions, which allows you to basically plug in extensible things to your Lambda functions, and this is great for observability and monitoring and logging and security and secrets management. That's a cool thing. You just take a whole bunch of code out of your Lambda function, and these extensions can help you with that. So it's a super way to plug deeply into the Lambda service. And we can talk about that a bit as well.
Let's talk a little bit about that as well, because I think that's one of my favorite announcements. Yeah. Because containers, I don't do containers. I'm a serverless developer. Yeah. I left containers long in the past. So for me, extensions was very exciting.
Cool. Well, I mean, that's it. But back to your point as well is, with the container image support, I know we're taking a bit of a sidebar and digressing to talk about the extensions. But the thing is, with the container image support, you don't have to use it. You can continue to use Lambda as you know and love for now, and it works awesomely. So this isn't a replacement or any of that kind of thing. But extensions comes from a use case of, I've got a whole bunch of tools that I already use, and these may be AWS tools or partner tools. So think if you're using Datadog or AppConfig or Splunk or AppDynamics or, a whole bunch of these really great tools, AppConfig, the AWS tools, all these other amazing partners, CoreLogic, they're coming off the top of my head, these amazing partners who build things for serverless, but you also may use these tools for your EC2 environment or your container environment or even on-prem. And the thing is, you didn't want to have that sort of, to use this in Lambda, I can't use it the same way. This is going to be tough. And I need to write a whole bunch of code within my Lambda function to either use a partner service or to do something. And that's, that makes Lambda just that little bit harder to.
It's quite typical to wrap your Lambda function around something to be able to use some library of observability, and that's kind of annoying.
Exactly. But the thing is, Lambda also people want to gather more stuff from Lambda than just what happens inside the function, because what they want to do is they want to know, well, how long is the function going to run, grab some logging data out, and all this kind of stuff happens around the function, not necessarily just within the function. So extensions is a new capability which allows you to basically bury deep into the Lambda service and be able to pull telemetry data out of the Lambda service about your function invocation. And the cool thing is that extensions can start up before your function runs and can continue running after your function runs. So that means you can set up your observability or your logging or your secrets management or your config management before your function even runs. And so it's ready there, either gathering data or ready to send data somewhere else. Your function can then invoke and do whatever it needs to do. And then after your function has finished, your extension can go, okay, I can reason about that. I can take that telemetry data, send it elsewhere, send logs to Elasticache directly to S3, not going via CloudWatch logs, or, upload my telemetry data to a partner third-party system, or do all that kind of thing. The cool thing is your function sits there. You haven't had to change anything with your function, haven't had to any code to your function, and you can just now plug in one of these excellent partners or an AWS service. And that just makes it super simple. Very little configuration. Maybe you need to add an environment variable to set up an access key. And that's it. Super easy.
For example, for app config is pretty interesting because you save a lot of money, because if you are calling it from your Lambda function, you basically need to open that connection to app config and you're billed by that time, and it takes a lot of work but if you do it in the extension, that's handled with cache and in a more kind of smarter way. So you save quite a lot of money when calling the app config just for verifying if some parameter changed, and then you can really decouple your parameters without needing to worry. And it's just like all the benefits of app config and very cheap.
and with the speed boost, you mentioned the cache, because it's basically the extension runs as a local cache for app config. So if you think you've got a synchronous Lambda function behind an API gateway, or maybe via step functions or something, every time your function's going to run and it needs to then pull configuration from somewhere else, well, that's latency. So if you can just do a local HTTP call to a cached version of that, super quick. Also going to save you money in your Lambda invocations. So yeah, that's the bigger picture. I mentioned briefly about logs. That's another capability of extensions. Previously, you had to set up another Lambda function to pull logs from CloudWatch logs, to send to S3, to send to Coralogics, to send to an Elastic Cache, for example. And now you don't have to do that. You can have an extension that can literally pull logs. Lambda can send logs directly to the extension from within the execution environment, and so it just removes a whole bunch of extra heavy lifting which you don't need to do. So extensions is a super good sort of allowing you to reach in more to Lambda, understand a bit more how it works. It sort of peels back the onions of that black box where people are like, oh, this is all a bit strange, I don't get Lambda. Well, now you've got control of part of how
But
Lambda
I think
works.
there, at least it's one of those big launches. Maybe it doesn't sound that big because it was announced somewhere beginning, like not in the main stage of Andy, but like it seems like, but for me as a serverless developer, I think it's quite a big thing. I don't know what Anton thinks that you're also doing serverless. Do you like extensions or you find them useful?
Well, I think I first find practical use case for extension when I looked into Power Tools project, because I think they use extension to actually send CloudWatch logs asynchronously. So after your function executes, then they send logs somewhere. At least this is my understanding. But they also send not just logs, but also metric data. So that you...
I don't think that's actually using an extension. What that is using is the new embedded metrics format.
Right. Yeah, that's one.
So that's not using an extension, but ultimately it's also speeding up and simplifying your Lambda function. So for people that don't know, Power Tools is an open source utilities plus logging, metrics, and tracing bundle of cool stuff that AWS has been working with, spearheaded by the most awesome Hater Lesser. So he probably knows more about serverless than anybody I know. He's taught me loads. And so the cool thing is with this and the embedded metrics format, which Power Tools makes super easy to use, is instead of having to do synchronous calls within the Lambda function to use the put data API, you can just use an asynchronous call with a cloud embedded metrics format, adds more information into your CloudWatch logs, and you don't then need to run some fancy stuff to get your metrics from it.
Yeah, the Power Tools are pretty cool. I'm posting now a video in the chat that I took with Hater about that, and it was super nice to see them. And I think after using the Power Tools, then all the observability, and we will talk a little bit more about observability in a while because it's Julian's reinvent talk. All the observability things are kind of done for you. But let's continue talking about extensions and the story on how we end up in containers.
So, I mean, hopefully I've sort of painted the picture of the extensions being the one side of allowing you to dive deep into the Lambda service. But the cool thing is although extensions can be very complex and very complicated in what it can do, to consume it is super easy. And with a zip function, you literally just add a Lambda layer. So if anybody has worked with Lambda layers before, it's a way to bundle code package dependencies, and you literally add a layer to a Lambda function and it just sucks the code in. When the function runs, those additional layers just get automatically copied in and imported. And so, if using even an app config extension or one of the other partners I mentioned and many more, literally the the way to use it is add a Lambda layer. So, it's literally
can
in the
you use
console of
multiple
RCLI.
extensions in a Lambda?
You can. So you can use up to 5 Lambda layers in a function, but you can have multiple extensions within a Lambda layer.
Oh, nice.
So in fact, I think you can have up to 10 extensions registered per function.
Oh, so layers and extensions will, even if you import them as a layer, it's kind of counted differently in the.
Yeah, because if you're using a layer from a partner, you can't then combine multiple layers into a single layer. So if you've got you're using somebody else's published layer, then you would be limited to the 5 layers in maximum. But if you have your own extensions for your own kind of tooling, you could bundle multiple extensions into a single Lambda layer as a delivery mechanism.
Okay, so if you are putting them all together, that's
exactly, squash them all together.
Cool.
Yeah, so they're super easy. You can write your own extensions if you want to do any kind of crazy stuff. So yeah, just look for Lambda extensions. It's an easy name to Google. There's a blog post on how to consume Lambda extensions. There's a blog post on how.
Yeah, I was about to paste that one in the chat because I think you wrote it, so that's very good. Oh, nice. So it's in the chat now. If people want to read, I think it's a very good blog post.
Thank you.
Can you explain a little bit how is it related to pricing? I mean, what if this extension cost will take, I don't know, 5 seconds? Should I pay for these 5 seconds?
So there is no change in the way that Lambda pricing happens, but so there's no additional charge for using an extension above and beyond the Lambda function, except you are still charged for the time taken for a Lambda function and all extensions to run. Mm-hmm. So if you have a Lambda function that runs for 60 seconds and the extension takes another 5 seconds, your Lambda function invocation is going to be 65 seconds.
Right.
In total.
Yeah, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
So there is no magic involved where you suddenly pay less.
No.
Yeah, it will be a kind of interesting loophole.
Yeah. But there are some interesting use cases because extensions run as a separate process within the execution environment, because normally with a Lambda function, it's just a single process that runs. An extension is an additional process. So that can run in parallel to your Lambda function. So obviously it's going to take some memory and compute, but you do have some now parallelization of while your Lambda function is running, your extension can be doing things as well.
That's interesting.
So suddenly we can put a lot of meaningful logic into extension and run it in parallel.
Yes, you can.
Oh, no.
I know. What are the crazy things people are going to come up with? Can't wait to see.
I'm waiting for that because that's always so fun when people start doing all crazy hacks around the tools that AWS provides. So cannot wait. So let's chat a little bit about the container image support now.
So this is the sort of next part of this journey of making Lambda easier to use. And people who use Lambda and who have been sort of grown up with Lambda and haven't used containers and everything may not see a use case for this other than just a bigger size. And that's absolutely cool. As I said before, continue to run your Lambda functions as is. That's just the way it is.
I think Norman has the question of the dinosaur in the room. Is there going to blur between Lambda and Fargate? Because I think that's the first question, like what it means.
Absolutely. Well, I'll explain a bit about the container image format, and then certainly I will cover that because there are quite obvious differences.
They are.
So the other kind of thing is if you work in a container ecosystem and you are used to building Docker files and you are used to running and managing containers, the sort of cognitive overhead of moving to Lambda can be a bit of a, this is weird. I don't get this. I'm used to my Docker files. I know how to build my artifacts. I know how to build my dependencies. I know how to build container images. Now with Lambda, I've got code and I've got Lambda layers and I've got dependencies and everything. And so this is a bridge between the two worlds to say, well, hang on, why don't you just create your Lambda function from a Docker container image? So That's basically what it is. So this isn't just you can grab any arbitrary container and run it on Lambda. The container images that you run on Lambda need to basically be compatible with Lambda. And that's not necessarily a hard and difficult thing to do, but it's just something to think of, as this isn't running any arbitrary container on Lambda. This is running event-driven applications.
And I think that's the key wording, because when you think about it, I think that Norman question between Fargate and Lambda, they are very different services, because in Fargate, you just throw an application or a service into it. And in Lambda, you throw a function. Even though it's inside a container, it's still event-driven. That is not running.
So to explain the event-driven part of it, because all of Lambda runs on events, and a Lambda function invokes based on an event. What is an event? An event is a file being landing up on S3. An event is something on an SQS queue. An event is something hitting an HTTP API or an API gateway API. So think of it as even when you hit a URL, you hit API gateway, the fact that you're hitting API gateway kicks off an event which fires off a Lambda function. We've got integrations. I think it's like 140 different services.
Even an event can be time passing. Like
exactly.
There's cron shops. There is all kind of weird events.
And so that's on the one side. That's the events. While in a container world, you often are talking about ports and sockets. And so when you build a container from a Docker file and you run that container somewhere, that is running a service that you access via a port and a socket. Lambda doesn't need ports and sockets. We use an event-based model. Other containers use a port and socket-based model. So Fargate is a great place if you don't want to manage, how your containers are going to run. You've got an existing container. Maybe that's going to run Nginx. Maybe it's going to run WordPress. Going to run kind of anything, but it's going to have a port and socket mode with it, that you're going to have something that goes into that container to run. And that's great for Fargate. Good for long-running tasks. Lambda's time-bound for 15 minutes. Fargate tasks can carry on for much longer. But with Fargate, you've got the flexibility of running more broader containers. You've got the possibility of longer time, but you don't have this rich event connection with the rest of AWS and also other partners. So if you running behind an API and you want that API to kick off something in a Fargate container, well, you're going to have to manage that relationship and that connectivity between the two. So events for Lambda, sort of stateful kind of containers with a port and socket model for Fargate. That's hopefully the differentiation. Does that explain it well enough, or am I? What else can I say?
For me, it's very clear, because I've been looking at this for a while. I hope for the audience too. If you have any questions about this is the right moment to ask, because I think Julian can help us to understand. One of the questions.
I have a question actually to this one. So when you mentioned that like the difference between Lambda and Fargate, what do you think is like common ground or like simplest thing which I can do, which will run with less customization on Lambda and on Fargate? For example, currently or previously, let's say last week, we didn't have anything what we can easily rebuild. I mean, zip and Docker file are two different things, right? Now we at least have Docker file and Docker file. So yes, we use different base images there, but still it is at least possible to run Lambda containers on Fargate, right? Maybe it will be over-engineering in most cases, because you don't need all Lambda specific in your Fargate. But what do you think is like common ground for situations? Because there are some cases where I'm just thinking about projects where I work that we occasionally run something on Fargate and occasionally on Lambda. And I don't want us to even think about where this code is going to be executed, then do these 20 steps.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I think that's part of that's to sort of discover the different use cases. Lambda, being the event-driven model, has got the great connectivity already to these 140 plus services, but it does mean your container needs to be built in a way to take advantage of that. And to take advantage of that, there's a thing called a runtime interface client. And this is the little, basically, HTTP server that's built, managed, and run by the Lambda service that proxies those events that when they hit your function. And so, yeah, sure, you could port that and you could run that into Fargate. In fact, yesterday, Kelsey Hightower from Google got Lambda running on Google Cloud Run. So that portability story is there. And, for people who say, oh, I'm going to get locked in with Lambda and everything. Well, if you can run Lambda on Fargate, that's part of the story. But what's important about Lambda, it's not just that function running. Lambda is the connection to the 140 plus services. It's IAM built in. It's ridiculous scalability built in, globally available, highly available, resilient, super fast and super performant. So yes, I've got my little function code and maybe I can run, little parts of the Lambda runtime API somewhere else, but Lambda's power really is about all the integration. And that's what makes Lambda super useful.
Well, I'm also thinking about this as a development environment. Like in development environment, I don't have all these 140 services, and there is no way for me to bring all of them. Let's say I know that it's probably a good idea to have as much as possible locally.
Test in the cloud.
Yeah, test in the cloud. We talked about this before, but what I'm just trying to say is that. I really like this proxy tool, which, well, I couldn't make it to work myself, but I've heard people were more successful than me. So it probably works. And I'm just imagining that if I can embed this local proxy tool in my development flow, I will be able to execute this with a pretty decent equivalent of Lambda, but without going to Lambda itself. So I can run Lambda locally and have it executing my unit test or my functional test with less dependencies.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the use case that's come out. And if you look at the SAM CLI, which was updated yesterday, that literally uses this whole process, and so that it's called the runtime interface emulator, and so that's the other part of Lambda to make Lambda work. And if you use SAM CLI, and anyone who's used SAM CLI who doesn't know SAM CLI, it's the serverless application model, and it's a framework for building serverless applications. Just makes it super easy to get going. It's my preference if I want to build a serverless app. There are blueprints, there are templates available. You just do SAM init, even with a container image format, build it down. You're like, okay, I've got a starting block and I can go from there. So it's a super way to get going. And the SAM local to run Lambda locally for testing, that exactly uses it. Pulls down these container images, runs your function, and spits out the result. And that's exactly the great kind of thing. You want local fast iteration, but just really for your function code. Then if you're going to start to integrate with the rest of the cloud, and maybe you need to test something against DynamoDB or S3 or any of the other serverless services, you can think about not mocking them locally, but rather using cloud versions of that. Two ways to do it: run it in the cloud as Lambda, because a test environment is super easy to set up within the AWS cloud. But you can also run your Lambda function locally on your laptop, but still interacting with S3 or Dynamo or something in the cloud.
Yeah.
No, I think that's something, a discussion from how to do tests against the cloud. Should we need the internet? Should we not? That makes people...
The bigger picture is rather think about bringing your cloud bringing your testing to the cloud rather than your cloud to your testing. So you don't want to rebuild AWS just to do some unit tests locally.
No.
You want to unit test your function, which is what you're actually working on. You're not really unit testing whether S3 is going to be available.
Yeah, and that's another different test if you want to do resiliency tests or chaos engineering or things like that.
Let me just continue with the container image and try and explain how these images are actually created. So for people who are aware and who live in the whole Docker world, people know about a Docker file. And a Docker file is a set of instructions for building a Docker image. And so when you build a Lambda function that's going to run a container image, you use a Docker file to build the container image. And you can start from a base operating system one of two different ways. One can be from the AWS provided base operating system. So this will be for Python, for Node, for .NET, for Java, for basically all the runtimes that we support. And this is a version of those operating systems which includes the runtime interface client. And that's as if you were building a function in the console via the zip format and you went Python 3.8, for example. So this is just going to download the Lambda optimized and Lambda created version of Python 3.8. And then on top of that, well, you're going to copy your function code maybe in. There are going to be maybe some dependencies you need to install. So in your Docker file, you can do a pip install or an npm install or something like that. Maybe you want to copy some files around. Maybe you want to copy some things from layers, copy something from the internet, whatever you're going to do. You basically
are these images available in the public ECR that was announced?
Yeah, so two different places the images are. So ECR is the Elastic Container Registry, and that is AWS's new public container registry. And there's also Docker Hub. So there is a Lambda-specific Python or Node or .NET version of the client available on the ECR public and also Docker Hub. And so if you build a Docker file, you just say from AWS Lambda-Python.3.8, and it's going to pull down that Python 3.8 image. And then you're just going to add more commands inside this Docker file to build your execution environment. Once you do that, you then basically bake that image, you then tag it, you've got to give it a name. And then what you actually do is you upload that image then to ECR, so the Elastic Container Registry, and you have a ECR repository. You upload that container image over there, and that's where it gets stored. That can be up to 10 gig in size, and that's going to just sit there as an immutable image layer. And I'll mention some of the benefits and some of the caveats with that immutable layer.
And we can chat a little bit. I think the next question that people ask me, at least when this announcement happened, is like, what about 10 gigabytes? Is that like, what about cold starts?
Absolutely.
How you're doing that?
No, well, that'll be the next bit I'll explain. So what happens with that, once your image is then in ECR, you build a Lambda function. And basically when you do in the command line or in the console or with even Terraform or SAM or Serverless Framework or whatever, you say, build that function and use that image in the repository. And what's that thing going to do is that's going to grab that image from the repository and build your Lambda function. And so that image is going to be immutable, which basically means it's read-only, which also means that you've got an interesting kind of thing. Before, when you created a Node 10 Lambda function, for example, the version of Node in the background would just keep getting updated. And that's super cool because you don't need to worry about patching. You don't need to worry about security vulnerabilities, maintenance, all that kind of thing. It is cool, but for some people, it's a bit annoying because maybe there's going to be a CDK thing that's going to break, or maybe there's going to be something that's going to go a bit funny. And so being able to have immutable read-only layers allows you to fix all of those dependencies in your Lambda function basically forever. And so you can be 100% sure that every time you're going to invoke or run that Lambda function, you're not going to have any funny surprises because something has been updated. So that gives you the flexibility to do that, but that does also mean you then take on the responsibility of managing the contents of your Lambda functions a bit more, and you are then responsible for updating patches or SDKs or that kind of thing. So,
but also adding new runtimes should be way easier now with the containers.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a custom runtimes, which we've had for a number of years. You add them pretty much in the same way as the normal runtimes, and you can literally build whatever you want to do. You can build even from Alpine Linux or Ubuntu or literally any Linux distribution, build your Lambda function, and then we've got public image layers for the runtime interface clients, and you simply add that in and build your Lambda function, and that's it. So Marsha, you were talking about, we've got these 10 gig functions. Are you absolutely crazy? My cold starts are going to be like insane.
That's the first thing people think.
Deep breaths. So I'll go back to how the zip functions work. And basically, the zip functions, what happens is in the background, and I think we say this, that those functions actually stored in S3 somewhere. Obviously, super scalable, super huge, the sort of eighth wonder of the world in terms of cloud storage. But the thing is, that function code was then copied to the Lambda environment when you initialized your function. So that's the reason there's a 250 meg limit, is because if you've got to copy a whole bunch of stuff, your cold starts are going to be insane.
Exactly.
So now we've got container image formats. How does that change? Well, the cool thing about a container image is that in itself is built up of a bunch of separate layers, and those layers can be cached. So when you create your Lambda function, we go through what we call an optimization. And part of that optimization is basically caching those layers of the Lambda function close to where the function is going to run. So if you import the Python 3.8 base image, the first person in a region, and that's probably been done already, is going to cache that Python 3.8 base image, and so that's going to be available in the cache close to where the function is going to run. Then, as soon as more and more layers go, more and more image layers go to in the cache just gets fuller and fuller and more rich and more closer to your function. So ultimately, in your whole big Lambda function, you actually may only have a little bit of unique code that's really your function code, and that's not going to be cached, but that will be pulled down from the layer when your function is created. And so literally you don't have a cold start penalty with the 10 gigs. It runs similar to your zip archives, and that optimization on the back end makes it all super cool.
So, for example, now we create a Lambda function with Docker, so it will take a little while to do this optimization, and then it will be ready.
Yeah,
So
and that's only during the creation part. So it's not actually during the function initialization. So when you create your function, maybe you've got to wait for a few seconds.
You deploy it basically.
You basically deploy it and you wait. And also, if you're also updating a Lambda function, invocations will always go to the old version of the Lambda function. When you then update it, it's going to go through the optimization process. It's going to be in a pending state. Invocations are still going to go to the old version of the Lambda function, and then as soon as that pending state and it's active, the next invocation will go to the updated Lambda function.
So that's a little change in the way that the deployment goes through. Yeah. But it's pretty cool how this is built in layers, and I think that's something at least I was not imagining when I started looking at this. It's like,
and that's the whole optimization going behind the scenes. You don't have to think about that. You don't have to manage. You don't have to say, oh, put this into cache because it's going to be available. Lambda just takes care of that for you. And secretly, a little bird tells me that also in the future is going to enable some cool stuff. There's always new cool things happening.
There is always cool things happening. I like how Lambda has been going from this really thing that can do only one thing, and it was super minimal. When I got to know Lambda, like when it was announced, we got a call. I was working in a big customer from Nordics, and we got a call from our account manager like, hey, we launched Lambda. Does somebody want to try it? And I was like, no, this is an ops thing. It didn't have integration with API Gateway. It was just like thing there. And then when it got integrated to API Gateway, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And the more time passed, the whole thing became more and more. Soon is one of the staple products of AWS. So it's super
But it's
cool
interesting
to see.
how different people come from different backgrounds, because lots of people come from a web app background behind API Gateway, and they're like, oh, Lambda's just amazing for building web applications. But I actually come from an infrastructure background. I'm not a hotshot coder or developer. I have done that in my past, but that's not my bread and butter. I come from an infrastructure background. I used to, rack and patch servers and SANs and network switches and firewalls and all that kind of thing. And Lambda's cool for me because it means you just don't look after that whole kind of thing.
Exactly.
running containers and having to worry about ports and sockets and that kind of thing. I mean, Lambda IP addresses. Do you care about IP addresses unless you're doing VPCs? No. So all of that infrastructure complexity goes away, and that's why I love it.
Yeah. Let's chat a little bit about, Anton was mentioning the Aurora serverless and that update for him.
I just want to add to what Julian said, is that this new functionality with possibility to launch Docker containers completely eliminate the need of building artifacts for runtime. For example, if I'm on Mac and I need to build binary for Linux, previously I was doing this in a Docker container and then copied this artifact and put it into my zip archive. Now I have to delete some files.
That's good. Deleting code is always good.
Yeah, I usually like it. Cool. Thanks a lot for this.
When we were preparing, Anton, you were talking a little bit about the version 2 of serverless Aurora. What is your feelings on that?
Yeah, my feelings are just mixed. I mean, I cannot imagine how such amazing piece of something can be so fast. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Amazon Aurora Serverless V1 was for, I don't know, a couple of years, right? Maybe even more.
Yeah, there were 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years, and there were some people asking for proxy so that they can use it without significant penalty inside of Lambda functions. And now this V2, which can scale in a matter of
milliseconds,
in a fraction of second. I simply cannot imagine how it is possible from technical point of view.
Yeah, I think if Lambda was in this kind of magic box of how this dark magic happens, because I also don't understand. Like, I would love to sit on a session. Do you have some sessions to recommend on how Lambda works in this data center, Julian? Is there something like that?
Well,
because there was the firecracker.
Well, exactly. There is always look out. Mark Brooker, who's one of our principal engineers, who was one of our principal engineers on Lambda, and he literally is one of the biggest brain boxes in the world. And from he's got a PhD in distributed systems. Like,
wow.
Exactly. And he's doing a talk on Lambda function isolation. And that's talking exactly about Firecracker. And it talks about some of the life cycle of a Lambda function and some of the container stuff. And I think that's in week 3 of reInvent. But it's listed as a 400 level talk, but it's actually a 500 level talk. But you're not allowed to do 500 level talks. And Mark Brooker's talk is always amazing. If you really want to understand the depth of Lambda, that's one of the go-to ones to
it's in my list of things to watch, so I'm happy that I already captured. And I would like to recommend at least Julian's talk, because you have one talk also in week 3.
I do, yes. So I'm doing a talk on observability for your serverless applications. So it's obviously a big topic at the moment, particularly with distributed microservices, Lambda functions, SQs, all this kind of things. How do I do monitoring, logging, tracing, and also observability being a much bigger thing of being able to reason about your application from the outside? So yeah, I had great fun putting that together. It's only 30 minutes, so I had to talk very fast with my funny accent, as some people say. So
at least you're a native speaker, believe me.
Oh, can you imagine? Yeah. Well, I would be embarrassed. I can't do it in Spanish or
Luckily,
Portuguese,
I'm Latino and I can rush through the 30 minutes super fast, and I have subtitles.
Exactly. So that's if you literally want to. If you want to get a handle on serverless applications and how to do X-Ray and CloudWatch and tie them all together and Lambda Insights and lots of different things. There's a whole bunch of different observability stuff which is covered in there.
Yeah, I think it's. I was talking to you way before when we were planning the sessions, and my session, I think it's like the perfect combination, because I'm talking about how to do the CI/CD part, and I also covering the container aspect of the CI/CD, and then I stop. Okay, now you deploy your code to production. Go to Julian's session. I don't have more time. Good luck.
Yeah. Yes, looking forward to that. Also, there's going to be live questions. So I will be, doing questions when that is happening. So yeah,
we will be all in the chats, and I think that's something that is happening when the session is live for the first time. So if you want to find Julian's session, is that code I put in the screen, because I think it's way easier to find it with the code than with the link, because the link only links to one time. And then my session is 10, so you can find those. Anton, do you have some session to recommend?
Well, yeah, I'm actually enjoying one. I've been to reInvent, I don't know, 4 times maybe before, and there is one talk which I attended every year, and every time speaker asks, did anyone watch my talk last year? And I raise my hand. And did anyone watch my talk the year before? And I still raise my hand. So I know
who he is.
You're a super fan.
Yeah, I am. But this time he is not gonna to have talk. And this talk, no, this talk was about VPC, from one to many, evolving VPC design. So the reason why I like this talk, and there will be some kind of talk like this, is that AWS release a lot of things every year. And it's just impossible to know about all of this. So I really like to go to his talk to just understand, okay, what has changed during this year in VPC. And I remember that 1 year there were IPv6 releases, and I was sitting like, oh my God, I have no clue what is IPv6, but it looks so cool.
It's going to be better than 4.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, there is no 5, so probably 6 is better.
But most of the services has this, what's new in Aurora, what's new in S3, and I think they're really good sessions if you're into that services.
Yeah, so networking thing is one, but if we're talking about serverless, my favorite...
Or anything.
Well, I have 2 which I really want to see, and actually one has just finished. So it's about hands-off automating continuous delivery pipeline at Amazon.
Oh, yeah. That's Claire talk.
Claire, yeah, because I read her article at Builders Library. And, well, it's amazing what's going on inside of AWS. And I'm quite sure that many of us can learn from it. And, well, we are not operating on the same scale, of course, but still, it is extremely helpful. And also there is Builders Library, which is dedicated section of virtual thing, where all of these talks are listed. And I like all of this Builders Library just to learn how things are operating inside of AWS.
Yeah, today there is the monitoring production services in AWS from the Builders Library. So that's one of my recommendations if you want to know how we do it. I don't have a clue how they manage to monitor all this monster. So that's something I'm very interested in.
Yeah, and all those Builders Library documents are written by literally our cleverest engineers. These are the people who are writing these massively distributed parts. They literally are top engineers. So some of the best brains in the world.
Yeah. So, but few things which I didn't quite understand from this Builders Library documents sometimes are how they are related to AWS services which we end users are actually using. And one of the questions which I've been asking myself for several years is, do you guys really use AWS Code Pipeline?
I don't know. We have a number of different pipeline services within AWS. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing which I know that it's good for some people, but I cannot imagine that AWS can use this product inside of, like, maybe for some teams, some products use it, but on a bigger scale, things which Claire described in this long PDF and what she is talking in the video does not actually go hands on hands with code pipeline.
Okay.
So you probably have something else.
We are not developers, so
yeah.
Yeah, right.
You should ask in your next hero talk to if you meet some developers what they use.
Yeah, but overall, all of these Builders Library videos are highly recommended from my side.
Yeah. What about you, Julian? We have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I do. Well, basically, I mean, the first one just to highlight is AWS Step Functions. There's SVS 203, which is on later today. Step Functions is a great orchestration system. And
is that Gabe's talk?
Yeah, that's Gabe's talk. So that's certainly worth having a looking at. Step Functions, when you're starting to coordinate multiple Lambda services and wanting to have Saga patterns and all these kind of things, that's absolutely worth looking at. And then quickly, because I know we don't have that much time, is next week my colleague Ben Smith is talking about serverless LAMP stack. This is running PHP on Lambda. Super easy. He's gone into big detail. He knows it super well, and that's under the open source track, so OPN 302. Ben Smith is doing that. And then flicking down, Ajay Nair, who's the boss of Lambda. So he basically runs all of Lambda. He's got SVS 305, and that's building revolutionary serverless applications. And some of the tough stuff I've been talking about today, the bigger picture of building serverless apps. So what does it mean? What are the focus areas? What are we looking at? How are we making it easier for developers? He's going to be covering that. And that's one of our top leaders, which is going to be good. Another one, Rob Sutter, SVS 307, security for your serverless applications. So SVS 307, Rob's going to be covering that. Super important. And then Marsha's obviously got the CI/CD she mentioned into
we already mentioned that one.
And we've got Eric in my team, SVS 401, talking
Eric
about
is always
gateway.
A pleasure to watch.
Speaker.
So.
And then there's a 2-part on optimizing serverless apps. So Chris Munn's SVS 403 is doing it. And then literally finishing up reinvent, nearly one of the last things, is David Richardson, and he's the VP of serverless. I don't actually have the
that's
session,
a leadership session.
Yeah, that's a leadership session. It's an increasing innovation with serverless applications, and David literally runs a whole bunch of serverless kind of things at AWS. And so from a leadership perspective of why it's important, he's going to have a cool demo in there as well. And so it's nice to not let me not prompt what's going. He may be talking about some cool things, so let me prompt it.
I want to see him.
We're in the weeds. He's super smart. I've been on a number of calls.
And I'm not coding. It doesn't mean to me isn't smart or not smart.
Of course. My bigger point was that a lot of these sessions are really getting into the weeds of how to, turn this knob, or how to make Lambda fast or big. And Jay's and David's are sort of looking back at the bigger picture, and particularly if you like wondering whether serverless is good for you, or what the use cases are, or some of the future kind of stuff. They're really cool things to see how we think about serverless in the bigger picture rather than just nuts and bolts with.
And I think that's one of the interesting things. And also one of my favorite type of talks is listening customers' stories and what they are doing and how they are doing things, because that's always something very, very interesting. And there is my recommendation for today is watching the Disney and how they use DynamoDB to scale. I think that's what I would recommend you from today. And with that, I think we need to wrap up because we are over the hour.
We need another hour.
Yeah, it's really fun. And if you have any other questions, I will leave all the Twitters in the screen so you can ping Julian and Anton or me and keep the discussion going, because reinvent is all about the people and we all love to connect. So please do if you have any further questions. And if not, I will see you next week with more guests.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anton. Thank you very much.